When will Jesus return? And what can we know about the timing of his return, if anything? Well, to find out, let's turn to the authority on the subject, the Bible. When we look at the Bible, you might be surprised at what we find out. Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is the timing of the Lord's return. Can we know anything about when Jesus is going to return? Some say no. So let's look here and see what the Bible says. When people say we can't know anything about the Lord's return, oftentimes they will cite these verses right here. So we have Matthew 24, verse 36. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "However, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows." We also have Mark 13, verse 32. Jesus says, "However, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself, only the Father knows." So here, Jesus is very clearly saying, no one knows the day or the hour. So it is correct when people say we cannot know the day or the hour of the Lord's return. There's no other way to interpret these verses. So anybody that comes to you and says, Jesus is coming back next week, or Tuesday, whatever day and month, or they give you a specific date, a time, anything like that, you can safely ignore that person. First, you need to kindly rebuke that person and point out these verses and say, that's completely contrary to what the Bible says. So no, you were wrong. But then run from that person. And again, you can safely ignore pretty much anything they say about the return of Jesus, but also the Bible, because I would question any teachings they would have on the Bible if they're telling you the specific date of the Lord's return, because the Bible is very clear. We do not and cannot know the specific date of the Lord's return. So we'll go on. We have this verse, Matthew 24, verses 43 through 44. People who say we can't know anything about the timing of the Lord's return will also point often to this verse as well. It says, it's again, Jesus speaking. He says, "Understand this. If a homeowner knew exactly when a burglar was coming, he would keep watch and not permit his house to be broken into. You also must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected." So here he's talking about, if you knew when a robber was coming, if you knew when a thief was going to come break into your house, well, you would be awake and alert. But you don't know that, so you need to be ready all the time. We also had this verse from Paul in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 2. He says, "For you know quite well that the day of the Lord's return will come unexpectedly like a thief in the night." So again, we have this illustration of a thief coming in the night unexpectedly. And people who say, not only can we not know the day or the hour of the Lord's return, but we can't know anything about the timing of the Lord's return, will point to these verses and say, how can the Lord come unexpectedly like a thief in the night if we're aware of the time frame in which he's going to return? And that's a good point to make. However, I would say they need to keep reading, because when we read the rest of that chapter, 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 4 through 8, so just a few verses later, we read this. It says, "But you aren't in the dark about these things, dear brothers and sisters, and you won't be surprised when the day of the Lord comes like a thief. For you are all children of the light and of the day. We don't belong to darkness and night. So be on your guard, not asleep like the others. Stay alert and be clear-headed. Night is the time when people sleep and drinkers get drunk. But let us who live in the light be clear-headed, protected by the armor of faith and love, and wearing as our helmet the confidence of our salvation." So here we have something totally different. We have Paul saying, well, Jesus will return unexpectedly like a thief, but not for those who are on guard and not asleep, who are staying alert and are clear-headed, because they are children of the light and of the day. So again, we have Paul telling us that, yes, it won't surprise you. So perhaps we can know something about the Lord's return. And I would point to other things in these verses as well. He says to stay on guard and to stay alert. Jesus tells many parables, and in many of those parables, he uses that same language. He says, stay awake, stay alert, and watch. These aren't suggestions, they're commands. And you'll hear many people say, well, Jesus commanded us to go and make disciples of all nations. And yes, he did. But then they forget these other commands. Jesus told us to stay awake, stay alert, and to watch. With an exclamation point, watch, right? So that begs the question, well, watch for what? What are we supposed to watch for? Luckily, Jesus tells us that. So if we go to Matthew 24, verse 28, Jesus says, just as the gathering of vultures shows there is a carcass nearby, so these signs indicate that the end is near. So that's what we're supposed to watch for. That's what we're supposed to look for, are the signs. And Jesus says, just as a gathering of vultures shows there's a carcass nearby, he's using this illustration. You see those in the air, you know, well, there must be a carcass nearby. Jesus has used illustrations like this in the past. Think of when he was talking to the religious leaders of his time. He said, you can look in the sky and look at the color of the sky and say, well, it's going to be fair weather, it's going to be bad weather. And he said, just you interpret the signs of the sky, but you do not interpret the signs of the times, meaning you know the prophecies of this time, my coming, his first coming. Well, likewise, Jesus expects, just as he expected the Pharisees to recognize the signs of those times, because he told them, you interpret the signs of the sky, but you don't recognize the signs of the times. He expects us as well to also recognize the signs of the times, the signs of his second coming. And here he is telling us that there are certain signs that will indicate the end is near. They won't indicate the day or the hour, but those who are awake and alert and keep watch for these signs will not be caught unaware as a thief appearing unexpectedly in the night, right? That's what Paul was telling us. You won't be surprised. You won't be caught unaware when the Lord returns, because you stayed awake, you stayed clear-headed, you were alert, you watched as Jesus told you to do. And Jesus is saying to study these signs. Now, what are these signs? So what signs? Well, the signs he talked about in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. Jesus gave many signs. The prophets gave signs that pointed to the millennial kingdom, because that was the reference here. Is the disciples came to Jesus and they said, what are the signs of your return and the signs of the establishment of your kingdom? So the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. And he said, these are the signs that you will see. So what are some of those signs? Some of those signs are, the nation of Israel has to be back in the land. Jesus said Jerusalem would be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles come to an end. So we would expect the Jewish people to be back in control of Jerusalem. The prophets tell us that Israel will be surrounded by enemies who will try to destroy her. They tell us that Israel, while small, will have an exceedingly great army. Daniel tells us that travel and knowledge will increase significantly. Jesus says on an exponential curve, because it will be like birth pains just before his coming. We have the revival of the Roman Empire, the revival of this empire that will devour the whole world and create a one world government. So we would expect to see calls for and movement toward a one world government. The mark of the beast technology that says that the Antichrist will be able to control everyone who buys and sells. That's from Revelation 13. We would expect to see something like that coming into existence. The Gog of Magog alliance from Ezekiel 38 and 39, we would expect to see that forming together. Guys, we see all of those signs and more today. We see those signs. So what does that mean? What does that tell us? What does that indicate? Well, Jesus tells us that as well. So in Matthew 24, verses 32 through 33, he says, "Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near." So here's another illustration, just as with the vultures circling around and you know that there's a carcass nearby, or the Pharisees can interpret the signs of the sky, but they can't interpret the signs of the times. He's saying, learn a lesson from the fig tree. You see a fig tree beginning to bud, you know, hey, summer's around the corner, not winter, right? So likewise, he says, in the same way, when you see all these things, you can know his return is very near, right at the door. So just as we could look at the fig tree and know that the season of summer is upon us, we can also look at all of these things Jesus was talking about, all the signs Jesus and the prophets said to look for. When we see them converge together, when we see them appearing at the same time, we can know we are in the season of the Lord's return. We can know his return is very near, right at the door. Jesus says this over and over again. We have Mark 13, verse 29. Jesus says, in the same way, when you see all these things taking place, you can know that his return is very near, right at the door. And again, he tells us in Luke 21:28, so when you see all these things begin to happen, stand and look up, for your salvation is near. So it's true, we cannot know the day or the hour of Jesus' return. We just can't. But we can know the season. Jesus himself told us, and he commanded us to watch for it, to be alert and to be awake for it, not to dismiss it. So when people say, well, you shouldn't even bother with that stuff, focus on the Lord's work. Well, the Lord's work is what he has commanded us to do. So if they say that, essentially it's Jesus telling them, stay awake, be alert, and watch. And they would look at Jesus and say, no. Right? No, I'm not going to say that to Jesus. Jesus commanded me to do something. I'm going to do it. So I'm awake and alert and watching for these signs. And what do we see? We see these signs today. Now, I want to differentiate between what that means. There's two events that we're really looking at here when we're talking about when will Jesus return. The first is the rapture, Jesus coming back for his church. Then there is the glorious appearing, which takes place at the end of the 7-year tribulation. This is Jesus coming back. The armies of the world are gathered at Armageddon. He comes back. He destroys his enemies and establishes his millennial kingdom here on earth. So these two events they're not one and the same. The rapture has no signs associated with it. It can happen at any time. There are no preconditions for the rapture to occur. However, for Jesus to return at the glorious appearing at Armageddon, all sorts of things have to happen. We have to have a 7-year tribulation. We have to have the Antichrist ruling over every people, tribe, nation, and language. We have to have him go into the Jewish temple and commit the abomination of desolation. He has to institute the mark of the beast. There's bowl judgments and trumpet judgments and seal judgments. All sorts of events have to happen in that 7-year tribulation. So it's kind of hard to believe anybody would be surprised when Jesus comes back at the end. We're going to have a pretty good idea once we see all those things happening that Jesus is coming back at the end. So the question is the rapture of the church. When does that happen? I believe that it happens before the tribulation. There are some people that believe that it happens at some point during or after the tribulation. In this case, it doesn't really matter what you believe. At the end of the day, Jesus is telling us we are in the season of his return because we can see signs indicating that the tribulation is near, that those events are very near. We're seeing those signs. We see the convergence of those signs. And so we know that the tribulation is near and the rapture occurs prior to the tribulation. Well, then the rapture is going to come soon. And if it comes during the tribulation, which is soon, then it's also going to be very near. So regardless of your position on that issue, your position should be that we are in the season of the Lord's return, because the Bible makes that absolutely clear. Now, is there anything else we can know about the timing of the Lord's return? I believe so. I believe a much more definitive statement is available from Jesus if we keep reading in Matthew 24. So this is verses 33 through 35. Jesus says, in the same way, when you see all these things, that's the convergence of the signs again, you can know his return is very near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass from the scene until all these things take place. So what is Jesus talking about here? Who is this generation? Is it the generation he was talking to almost 2,000 years ago? Well, it can't be, because all those things did not take place back then. And as we read in verse 35, Jesus says, heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. You can be certain, absolutely certain, if Jesus says something, it will happen, right? So who is this generation that will not pass from the scene until all these things take place? Well, I believe that we just have to look to the verse before. I believe it's the generation that sees all these things, because he says you can know his return is very near, right at the door. In other words, when you see the convergence of all the signs Jesus and the prophets said to look for, not only is the return of Jesus very near, not only is he right at the door, not only should you look up because your salvation draws near, but he's saying the generation witnessing the convergence of those signs will not pass away until all these things take place. So guys, we live in the season of the Lord's return. I don't think the Bible could provide any more clarity on that point than it does. I mean, this is, again, we're looking at Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. Jesus is saying over and over again, when you see all these things take place, when you see the convergence of these signs, you can know that I'm coming back. Now, when he says this generation, what does that mean? What's the starting and the end point of that generation? I don't know. We could sit around and debate that all day, but I do know this. I know that it's not 200 years from now. It's not 1,000 years from now. I think it means people who are alive witnessing the convergence of these signs, they won't all die off until all these things take place and Jesus comes back. So whether that's next week, next month, 10 years from now, does it really matter? Yeah, Jesus is coming back. We live in the season of his return, and we should be living our lives according to that knowledge. And we should be helping to wake up others, make others more alert, make sure others are watching, make sure that they are living the lives that Jesus wants them to live, because he could come back at any moment. Keep in mind, even so, any of us could die at any moment. So we're going to meet Jesus face to face at some point before we pass away, before this generation passes away, whether it's through death or through the rapture, or some people that may be watching this later that are become Christians during the tribulation. One way or another, we're going to come face to face with Jesus. So we might as well get busy doing the Lord's work now and focusing on the things he said to focus on. And those commands include things like go and make disciples of all nations, but it also includes to be awake, to stay alert, and to watch. Again, Jesus gave us those as commands, not suggestions. So we should be watching. We should be eagerly awaiting the return of the Lord, is what the Bible tells us. So guys, I don't know what you think. Leave your comments below. Make sure to like and share this. Spread the message. Jesus is coming. We live in the season of the Lord's return. So God bless you, and God willing, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.